The house was a ghost, not the benevolent, storybook kind, but a gaunt, skeletal specter of a thing, its clabbered skin peeling away to reveal the gray, rotting bones beneath. It stood at the end of a winding, overgrown lane in a small coastal town in Maine, shrouded by the gnarled limbs of ancient oaks, a monument to forgotten dreams and the relentless bite of salt-laden wind. Eleanor Vance saw its potential immediately. She stood before it, the brisk autumn air whipping strands of her meticulously styled chestnut hair across her face. Her hands, usually occupied with a tablet or a rolled-up set of architectural plans, were shoved deep into the pockets of her cashmere coat. At 35, Eleanor was a titan in her world. Her name was synonymous with sleek, soaring glass towers and avant-garde cultural centers that graced the covers of international design magazines. She dealt in clean lines, perfect angles, and the unassailable logic of load-bearing calculations. This house, known locally as the Widow's Watch, defied all logic. It listed slightly to the east, as if weary from centuries of staring out at the relentless Atlantic. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle like a tired smile, and several windows were boarded up, their glass long since surrendered to storms or vandals. It was chaos. It was a ruin. And it was hers. The purchase had been impulsive, a wild deviation from the carefully plotted trajectory of her life. It was a rebellion against the sterile minimalism of her own apartment, a silent scream into the void of a career that had become more about profit margins and client egos than about soul. She had bought the ghost, and now she had to make it live again. Her reverie was shattered by the growl of an engine, a battered, paint-flecked pickup truck, a relic that looked as old as the house itself, rumbled to a halt beside her pristine BMW. The door creaked open and a man unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in worn jeans and a flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. His hair was a sun-streaked brown, too long to be neat, too short to be a deliberate style. A day's worth of stubble shadowed a strong jaw. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, scanned the house with a practiced, assessing gaze before settling on her. "You Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "I am," Eleanor said, her tone instinctively shifting to the cool, professional one she used with contractors. "You must be Mr. Croft." "Liam," he corrected, pulling a worn leather tool belt from the passenger seat and buckling it around his hips with a practiced, efficient motion. The gesture was so inherently capable, so grounded, that it made Eleanor feel suddenly frivolous in her designer coat. He didn't offer a handshake. His were already occupied, one calloused hand resting on the head of a hammer tucked into its loop. He walked past her towards the house, his boots crunching on the gravel. "So this is the patient," he said, his gaze traveling up the dilapidated facade. "Heard she was a mess. Photos didn't do it justice." "I'm aware of the challenges," Eleanor said, following him, her heels sinking into the soft earth. "That's why I hired you. Your references were impressive." Liam gave a non-committal grunt, placing a hand on one of the porch support columns and giving it a gentle push. The entire structure groaned in protest. "Foundations are tired. Sill plates probably rotten. Roof looks like a family of raccoons has been using it for a wrestling mat." He glanced back at her, those blue eyes piercing. "You an architect," your references said. "What's a city girl like you want with a money pit like this?" Eleanor bristled. "I have a vision for it. To restore its original character while integrating modern livability." Liam almost smiled. It was a faint, fleeting thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Vision, right? Well, vision's cheap. Lumber and sweat aren't." He pulled a heavy keyring from his pocket and approached the front door, a massive, paneled oak thing scarred by time. "Let's see what the inside of your vision looks like." The key turned with a groan that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the house. The door swung inward, releasing a breath of damp air, dust, and forgotten years. The interior was a cathedral of decay. Faint light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like lost spirits. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, mildew, and the profound silence of abandonment. A grand staircase swept up to a shadowed landing, its balustrade missing several spindles like a gap-toothed smile. Peeling wallpaper hung in sad, floral ribbons, and the floors were carpeted in a gritty layer of dirt and debris. Eleanor's professional eye began to catalog the horrors. Significant water damage on the ceiling, evidence of pest intrusion, and a worrying crack running up one wall. But beneath the devastation, she saw the bones. The high ceilings with their intricate, if damaged, cornices. The elegant proportions of the rooms. The massive fireplace in the living room, its marble mantelpiece just waiting to be cleaned and admired. Liam moved through the space like a surgeon in an operating room. He tapped walls, knelt to examine floorboards, ran his hand along window frames. He was silent, his focus absolute. "This wall is load-bearing," he stated, pointing to the one with the crack. "But the lintel over the fireplace is cracked. It's settling. It's not a quick fix." "I don't want quick fixes," Eleanor said, pulling out her tablet and opening a design app. She called up her initial sketches: open plan living, a new chef's kitchen, a master suite with an ocean view balcony. "I want it done right. I've drawn up some preliminary plans for the interior reconfiguration." Liam walked over and looked at the glowing screen. He studied the crisp, clean lines, the perfectly rendered 3D model of the space, stripped of its history and its ghosts. He was silent for a long moment. "These are nice pictures," he said finally, his voice flat, "but they're not for this house." Eleanor blinked. "I beg your pardon? You've drawn a box. A very nice, very modern box. You want to gut it, tear down walls, put in a glass balcony." He shook his head, gesturing at the room around them. "This house isn't a box. It's an organism. It has a spine and ribs and a history. You can't just impose a design on it. You have to listen to it, work with it." Fury, hot and sharp, flashed through Eleanor. No one spoke to her like that. Not junior partners, not billionaire clients. "Mr. Croft, I am a Pritzker shortlisted architect. I think I know a thing or two about design." "I don't doubt it," Liam said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "For new things. For things that have never been alive. This house has been alive. It's just sick. You don't cure a sick person by giving them a whole new skeleton. You help the one they have heal." He turned and walked towards the kitchen, leaving her standing in the dusty living room, her tablet feeling suddenly alien and useless in her hands. The ghost of the house seemed to watch her, and for the first time, Eleanor felt a flicker of doubt. She had bought a symphony and was trying to conduct it with a metronome. And Liam Croft, the rugged carpenter, was the only one who could hear the music. The following weeks settled into a tense, dusty rhythm. Eleanor would drive up from the city on Fridays, spending the weekends at a local inn, immersing herself in the project. Liam was there every day, from first light until the late afternoon, his truck a permanent fixture in the weed-choked driveway. Their interactions were a masterclass in professional friction. Eleanor would arrive with printouts, schedules, and material samples. "The structural engineer's report recommends steel supports for the main beam," she'd say, pointing to a line in a document. Liam would wipe sweat from his brow. "Steel's cold. It'll react differently to the humidity than the old timber. We can sister in new oak beams. It's stronger, and it's what the house expects. It's also 3 times the cost and twice the time," she'd counter. "It's the right way," was his infuriating, constant reply. He worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency that was both impressive and maddening. She watched him once, for a full hour, as he painstakingly repaired a section of the porch's gingerbread trim. He didn't measure with a tape. He used his eyes, his hands, carving and shaping a new piece of wood to fit the old, his movements fluid and certain. It was a kind of magic, an intuitive craftsmanship that no amount of formal education could replicate. One rainy afternoon, trapped in the relative shelter of the living room, the tension finally snapped. Eleanor was insisting on a specific, modern layout for the kitchen, involving the removal of a seemingly non-functional chimney breast. "It opens up the sight lines," she argued, growing frustrated with his silent resistance. Liam stood, walked to the wall, and tapped the plaster. "This isn't just a chimney. The flues for the old kitchen stove are in here. But more than that." He took a crowbar and, before Eleanor could protest, pried a small section of the rotten lath and plaster away. Behind it, nestled in the cavity, was a small, hand-carved wooden bird, dusty and forgotten. He pulled it out, gently brushing off the dust. Kids used to drop things down the gaps between the walls, for luck, or just for the fun of it. He held it out to her. "This house is full of stories. You start tearing out its guts for sight lines, and you lose them all. You're not restoring a house. You're building a museum exhibit." Eleanor took the little bird. It was crude, clumsy, made by a child's hand over a century ago. It was the most beautiful, most profoundly real thing she had held in years. She looked from the simple toy to her complex, glowing plans on the tablet. For the first time, her designs looked sterile, soulless. A crack appeared in her professional armor. I want it to be perfect," she whispered, the admission startling her. Liam's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing living is perfect, Eleanor. A tree isn't perfect. The ocean isn't perfect. That's what makes them beautiful. This house deserves to be beautiful, not perfect." He went back to work, leaving her alone with the weight of his words and the small wooden bird in her palm. The ghost of the house, she realized, wasn't just in the walls. It was in the man who was listening to them. A fragile truce was born from that rainy afternoon. Eleanor began to leave her tablet in her bag more often. She started asking questions instead of giving orders. "How do you know which floorboards can be saved?" she asked one morning, watching him assess the wide plank pine. He ran a hand over the wood. "You listen to the sound it makes when you tap it. A solid board has a certain ring. A rotten one has a dull thud. It's about feel." He looked up at her. "Here, try." Hesitantly, Eleanor knelt beside him. He handed her his hammer. She tapped a board. Thud. "See?" he said. She tapped another. "Tock. Good. That one stays." It was a small thing, but it felt like a revelation. She was learning the language of the house, and Liam was her translator. She learned about his life, too, in fragments offered over shared coffee breaks on the back steps. He had been a high school football star, set for a college scholarship, until a car accident shattered his knee and his future. He'd learned carpentry from his grandfather in this very town. He'd been married young. It hadn't worked out. No drama, he said, just two people realizing they wanted different lives. He had a quiet, uncomplicated existence. He fished. He read history books. He played in a local softball league. It was a life of making and mending, a stark contrast to her own life of creating and conquering. She found herself telling him things, too, the pressure of always being the visionary, the loneliness of a penthouse apartment that never felt like a home, the quiet ache of a personal life perpetually postponed for the next career milestone. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, they were working on stripping layers of old paint from the window frames in what was to be the master bedroom. The room faced the ocean, and the view was breathtaking. "You know," Liam said, scraping away a layer of hideous mint green paint to reveal the rich, dark walnut beneath. "The original builder of this house was a shipwright. You can see it in the joints. They're all lapstrake, like a hull. He built it for his bride, but she died of fever before they could move in. He lived here alone until he died. That's why they call it the widow's watch. He was the widow." Eleanor stared at him, the story settling deep inside her. "That's heartbreaking." "It's life," Liam said softly, his eyes on hers. "He built something beautiful out of his grief. Maybe that's what we're doing." The air between them grew thick and charged. The space was filled with the scent of citrus stripper and old wood, and the sound of their breathing. Eleanor was acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of him, the faint scent of sawdust and soap. He reached out not to touch her, but to brush a fleck of paint from her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected, that her breath hitched. The moment stretched, fragile and immense. Then, from downstairs, her phone rang, the shrill, insistent tone of her business line shattering the spell. The real world was calling, and the magic fled back into the shadows of the half-restored room. The call was from her biggest client, a tech mogul threatening to pull out of a multi-million-dollar museum project over a design disagreement. The following week was a whirlwind of crisis management. Frantic transatlantic calls, emergency board meetings, and appeasing a monstrous ego. Her world of steel and glass demanded her full attention, and the old house in Maine, along with its carpenter, felt like a distant, dreamlike interlude. When she finally managed to return, 2 weeks later, she was frayed, exhausted, and buzzing with a low-grade resentment for the demands of her other life. She found Liam not in the house, but in the small, dilapidated carriage house out back, which he had been using as a workshop. He was at his workbench, his back to her, bent over a piece of wood. He was using a hand plane, and the sound was a soft, rhythmic shush-shush-shush that was profoundly calming. Curls of fragrant oak fell to the floor. "You're back," he said without turning around. He always seemed to know it was her. "I'm back," she said, leaning against the doorframe, suddenly feeling the weight of her exhaustion. She watched the muscles in his back and shoulders move as he worked. It was a dance of pure, unthinking competence. "The client?" he asked. "Pacified, for now," she sighed. "It's like building castles out of sand, knowing the tide is coming in. Nothing I build in that world seems to last, or matter." He put down the plane and turned around. In his hands was a new baluster for the staircase, but it wasn't a simple copy. He had carved a gentle, flowing spiral into it, a design that echoed the waves of the ocean visible from the house. "It matters," he said, holding it up. "Because you're here. This matters." He gestured around the workshop at the house beyond. "This is real. This will last." Tears, unexpected and hot, pricked at the corners of Eleanor's eyes. She was so tired of fighting, of proving, of defending. Here, in this dusty workshop with this man, there were no arguments to win. There was only the wood, the tools, and the truth of the work. She walked towards him, her steps silent on the sawdust-covered floor. She stopped in front of him, looking up into his quiet, steady face. She saw no judgment there, no expectation, only a deep, abiding patience. "I don't want to talk about clients," she whispered. "Good," he murmured. This time, when he reached for her, there was no ringing phone to stop him. His hand came up to cradle her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was rough but infinitely gentle. And when he lowered his head and his lips met hers, it felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming. It was a kiss built not on passion alone, but on a foundation of shared dust, quiet understanding, and the slow, patient act of building something beautiful together. The summer that followed was the happiest of Eleanor's life. The house was no longer a project. It was their sanctuary. The air was filled with the sounds of their collaboration. The whir of her drill mixing with the rhythmic tap of his hammer, her laughter echoing his. She learned to swing a hammer without hitting her thumb, to distinguish between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. He learned to appreciate the elegance of her spatial planning, conceding that sometimes her sight lines could indeed frame a perfect sunset. They worked by day, and in the evenings, they would sit on the now sturdy porch, drinking wine and watching the stars emerge over the dark ocean. She told him about her childhood, her demanding parents, her drive to prove herself. He told her about his dreams of owning his own custom furniture business, of creating pieces that would become heirlooms. The house blossomed under their care. They decided together to keep the original floor plan, only making subtle, sympathetic changes. Eleanor designed a stunning, modern kitchen but insisted on using reclaimed cabinetry and a soapstone countertop that felt ancient and alive. Liam built a window seat in the master bedroom, following the curve of the bay window exactly as she had sketched it on a piece of scrap wood. They uncovered secrets together: old newspapers stuffed in walls for insulation, a child's height chart penciled on a doorframe, a cache of antique bottles buried in the garden. Each discovery was a thread, weaving them deeper into the tapestry of the house's history. One night, as they lay in a tangle of sheets in the middle of the floor of the still unfinished master bedroom, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and each other, Liam propped himself up on an elbow. "I love you, Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice quiet in the darkness. The words were simple, direct, and solid, like one of his oak beams. They held no agenda, no condition. They just were. She looked at him, at the man who had shown her that strength could be gentle, that history had value, and that the most important things in life were built by hand and by heart. The ghost was gone. The house was alive, and so was she. "I love you too, Liam Croft," she said, and for the first time the words forever didn't feel like a threat, but a promise she could finally keep. Autumn returned, painting the oak trees around the house in fiery reds and golds. The house was nearly complete. It stood proud and strong, its clapboards freshly painted a soft gray, its windows gleaming, its porch no longer sagging but welcoming. It was a perfect blend of its historic soul and thoughtful modern comfort. Eleanor was in the city, finalizing the handover of the museum project. It was a triumph. The critics loved it. But as she stood in the soaring, empty atrium on opening night, the accolades felt like echoes in a cavern. Her heart wasn't in the glass and steel. It was in a gray shingled house in Maine. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. "Found one last thing for you to see. Come home." Home. The word sent a thrill through her. She left the party without a second glance. She found him in the living room, standing by the grand fireplace. The room was warm, lit only by the fire crackling in the hearth and the soft glow of the lamps they had chosen together. "You're here," he said, a smile in his voice. "I'm home," she replied, the words feeling profoundly right. He led her to the fireplace. "I was cleaning out the last of the flue and found this." He pointed to the mantelpiece. "The shipwright who built this place. He carved something." Eleanor leaned closer. There, along the bottom edge of the marble, almost hidden, was a delicate, intricate carving. It wasn't a date or a name. It was a single, perfect line, the profile of a woman's face, looking out to sea. "He never stopped watching for her," Liam said softly. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but they were tears of joy, of completion. The ghost had finally been laid to rest, not by being exorcised, but by being understood, by being loved. Liam took her hand and led her to the window seat. He didn't sit. Instead, he knelt before her, his eyes full of a love as solid and enduring as the house around them. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady, "we built this house together. We built a life in it. Let's build a future in it, too. Marry me." He opened his hand. In his palm wasn't a diamond from a jeweler's box, but a simple, beautiful ring he had carved himself from a piece of the oak beam they had sistered into the foundation on that first, contentious day. It was warm, wooden, and utterly unique. It was a piece of their story, of the house's salvation, and of his own heart. She looked from the ring to his face, this man who had taught her that the best designs were not drawn on paper, but built with patience, trust, and love. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor knew she hadn't just restored a house. She had, with the help of a hands-on hero, rebuilt herself. She had learned that while she could design a stunning building, the truest, most beautiful home was the one you built with someone, nail by nail, heartbeat by heartbeat.